Hi, I'm Ophelia. Thanksgiving was supposed to be about family, but that year, my sister gave her golden retriever a seat at the table and told my kids to eat outside. No plates with our names, no chairs meant for us, just silence, and a folding chair next to the dog's bowl. They didn't say we weren't welcome, they didn't have to, but that was just the start. What if the people who raised you also erased you? What if the same hands that poured your wine quietly forged your signature to take everything you built? What happens when your family draws a line, and you're not even on the page? Let me tell you what really happened. I knew something was off the moment my mailbox stayed empty for the third day in a row. The week before Thanksgiving always brought that crisp, heavy air in Austin, like the wind itself knew what was coming. Most years, Vera's invitation arrived in a gold-trimmed envelope, complete with an over-designed RSVP card and a suggested dress code. This year, silence. I told myself not to read too much into it. Maybe she was running late, maybe she'd gone digital this time. But as the days crept by, the only pings I heard were from the family group chat, photos of place cards, centerpieces, and Vera's captioned posts. So excited to host my favorite people. Names were tagged. Laughter emojis poured in. My name wasn't there. Neither was Leora's or Kaylin's. "Are we not going this year?" Leora asked as she set her sketchbook down. She'd already drawn a Thanksgiving card for Vera. Turkey in the middle, hearts around the edge. It was her thing. She made cards for everyone, every year. Her hopeful eyes made my stomach tighten. I faked a smile, one I'd worn too many times. "We'll see, honey. Maybe Aunt Vera's just busy." But I knew. I spent that night telling myself all the excuses I could muster. Vera's been swamped. Maybe she thought tagging the group chat was enough. Maybe she assumed I'd just show up, like always. Maybe nothing had changed. Or maybe it all had. I should have just stayed home. But Kaylin asked me the next morning, "Do we still belong?" And that question knocked the wind out of me. Belonging had always been the thing I fought hardest for. I didn't want my kids to inherit that fight. So I pulled out the recipe for the apple cranberry pie that had always been Vera's favorite, not that she'd ever said so out loud, and spent the evening baking. I even let Kaylin sprinkle the sugar crust while Leora carefully packed her handmade card. They still believed in kindness. I wasn't about to be the one to take that from them. Thanksgiving morning, we left early. The drive to Dallas took 3 hours. The closer we got, the quieter the car became. I could hear my own doubts bouncing off the windshield, but I drove on. Vera's street looked like a postcard. Cars lined the driveway, people hugged on the front porch, music drifted out of the open windows. I parked half a block down and took a deep breath. We walked up, me holding the pie like a peace offering, Leora holding her card like it might open a door, and Kaylin trailing behind with a container of whipped cream. I rang the bell. Nothing. We waited. A minute. Another. I rang again. Still nothing. I didn't want to go around back. I really didn't. But old habits die slow. The gate was unlocked, like always. The porch light still buzzed with that faint flicker. The back door wasn't locked. We stepped inside. The kitchen was full. Laughs, chatter, plates being passed. No one looked up. For a second, I thought maybe they didn't hear us. But Vera was right there, folding napkins. She glanced up. "Oh, you made it." No hug, no smile. Just that clipped hostess voice she reserved for people she wanted to move past quickly. Leora handed her the card. Vera barely looked at it. "That's sweet, hun," she muttered, then slid it onto the counter between a tray of deviled eggs and a stack of cloth napkins. I glanced toward the dining room. The table was already set. 12 chairs, perfectly arranged. Name tags, chargers, gold flatware. Not a single extra seat. "Where should we sit?" I asked. Vera pointed vaguely toward the corner. "There's a folding chair by the wall. Might be a little wobbly. Hope that's okay." I turned. One chair, off to the side. No name tag, no plate. It wasn't okay, but I nodded anyway. I guided the kids toward it, helped Kaylin sit first. The chair creaked beneath him. Leora stood beside me, waiting. I looked around again. Still, no one seemed to notice. Or maybe they just didn't care. I set the pie down on the untouched corner of the buffet. Nobody acknowledged it. Then I crouched down next to that folding chair. One of its bolts was loose. I twisted it with my fingers, trying to tighten it, trying to hold something together that clearly didn't want to be fixed. And as I tightened the loose bolt on the chair, I realized this wasn't an oversight. This was a message. I adjusted the chair and watched my kids eat on their laps, while Vera's golden retriever had a padded seat at the table. The sun was hitting too hard out there. The metal chairs held the heat like it was personal. I laid a napkin down so Kalen wouldn't burn his legs. Leora looked around quietly, her hands still clutching the card Vera hadn't even read. She didn't say anything, but the way she sat, straighter than usual, told me everything I needed to know. "Do you think we did something wrong?" Kalen asked, barely loud enough for the wind to catch. "No," I said. "Not even a little." He nodded once. Still didn't touch his plate. I tried to play it off. "It's kind of like a picnic, right?" But even that felt like a lie stretched too thin. The dog's bowl sat by the sliding glass door, half full, closer to the air conditioning than we were. Through the glass, I watched the others toast with their wine, their champagne flutes clinking like punctuation marks to a story we weren't part of. Vera stood at the head of the table, her voice carrying just enough for us to hear. So grateful to have everyone here. Everyone. The pie I spent hours baking still sat on the kitchen counter, untouched. No one had acknowledged it, not even a glance. The whipped cream I packed in a cooler was probably melting by now. Leora leaned forward, squinting through the glass. "Mom, why doesn't our name show up?" I followed her gaze. On the dessert table inside, every slice of pumpkin pie had a handwritten name beside it. Uncle Ray, Aunt May, Cousin Maddie. Even one that said, "Vera's friend from Pilates." But nothing for us. Vera walked by at that moment, caught our eyes, and gave the kind of wave you give someone across a parking lot. Brief, bland, obligatory. I smiled back. The same kind of smile I'd used to get through college job interviews where they mispronounced my name and still expected me to be grateful. I used to believe these moments didn't matter, that my presence alone, my food, my effort, those things would speak louder than gestures. But gestures were everything in this family. Once, years ago, Vera had leaned over the Thanksgiving table and whispered, "Your pie's the only reason this family stays sweet." I'd thought it was a compliment. Now I see it for what it was. A line to keep me useful. Useful, not welcome. I sat back and looked at my children. Leora was silent, her plate untouched. Kalen was feeding the dog bits of crust. And no one, not one person, had asked us how we were doing, how school was going, if we needed anything. Not even a good to see you. I stood, brushed the crumbs from my lap, and walked back into the house. The air inside was cooler, sharper. Conversations paused just enough to let my footsteps echo. I found Vera near the sink, laughing with a woman I didn't recognize, probably the Pilates friend. "Hey," I said. She turned, startled like I'd interrupted something sacred. "Hey, oh." "I was wondering," I continued, "would it be okay if the kids came in for dessert? Just to sit at the big table for a bit?" Vera blinked. "There's already a setup for you. I thought the patio would be nice, sunlight and all." Her voice was sugary, the kind of tone people use right before they say something that stings. "I know," I said. "It's just, maybe they could come in for dessert. Just this once?" She shrugged. "It's just easier this way. Let's not make things complicated." It was the kind of dismissal that didn't raise its voice because it didn't need to, the kind that hits harder for its softness. Back outside, I didn't say anything to the kids. Just sat beside them again, took a bite of pie. It was perfect, balanced, tangy, sweet, warm in the center. I had made it with care, but in that moment, it tasted like paper. That day, my daughter learned you could be present and still not be counted. She spent the next hour watching through the window, while her plate remained full and her eyes stayed hollow. The air had cooled by then, and the sun had shifted just enough to leave us in shade. Kaylin leaned against me, legs stretched under the metal chair, head tilted toward the sky, as if trying to disappear into it. Leora sat close to the glass, her fingers drawing shapes on the fogged pane. She started with a heart, then erased it. Drew a tree. Erased that too. Eventually, she just left smudges. Inside, Vera moved through the room like a queen with a glass of rosé instead of a crown. She hugged, laughed, clinked glasses, and posed for photos she would later curate and caption with hashtags like sheer gratitude and the family first. No one glanced outside. We weren't part of the landscape anymore, just shadows behind glass. I tried not to look, but my eyes always wandered back. The table was full, every chair taken, every plate filled, every guest accounted for. The only thing missing was us. A flash came back to me. 3 years ago, Vera had forgotten to pick Mom up from her post-op clinic visit. Said she'd been tied up at a yoga retreat and her phone had died. I dropped everything, driven 90 minutes, and waited while the nurse fumbled through apology after apology. Mom hadn't said much on the ride home, just looked out the window like the trees were going to offer her some comfort I couldn't. Now, she walked past the patio door with a plate in hand and didn't even blink in our direction. As if that ride never happened. As if I had never been the one who showed up. I stood up and walked inside. I didn't ask for permission. No one stopped me. Isolde was at the end of the kitchen island, sipping her wine like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I approached her gently. "Mom," I said, "is it really okay we're eating out there?" She looked up at me like she'd been interrupted mid-thought. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're not seated with the family. There's no name cards for the kids. They're sitting on a patio bench next to the dog's dish." She blinked, slow. "Don't start something today. It's Thanksgiving." My jaw tensed. "Mom, this hurts." She leaned in just slightly, her voice quieter but sharper. "You always make things so hard, Ophelie." That was her way of ending conversations. Not solving anything, just shutting the door and locking it from her side. I didn't argue. I just walked out the same way I came in. Quietly, efficiently, like I'd never said a word. 10 minutes later, my cousin Drew wandered toward the backsliding door with a soda in hand. He smiled through the glass, waved like I'd just appeared from a time warp. "Didn't know you were coming," he said cheerfully, like we were bumping into each other at Target, not sitting outside a family meal like outcasts. Before I could answer, Vera's voice rang out from the table, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "She likes to pop in, adds a little flavor." A few people laughed. Drew looked down. My stomach dropped. I didn't react, not visibly, but something inside me cracked. Not a clean break, not something audible. Just a shift, a tiny dislocation that wouldn't reset. Leora turned to me. "Was that supposed to be funny?" I shook my head. "No, baby." Kaylin had stopped eating. His plastic fork rested on his napkin, untouched. The dog barked from inside, and someone actually apologized to it. "It's kinda like a picnic," Leora said, smiling at her brother. But it didn't reach her eyes. I smiled too, the way you do when you want to protect your kids from knowing just how cruel adults can be. But even I couldn't fake it well enough anymore. My heart stored every moment, every word, like photographs I couldn't delete. And like photos, they began to pile up, sharp, still, undeniable, each one capturing a new kind of erasure. That was the moment I stopped defending their silence and started grieving my own. She threw away a card, but what she really tossed was the last thread I was clinging to. The sound of silver tapping glass cut through the air like a warning bell. Vera, standing at the head of the dining table, lifted her wine and smiled that tight, camera-ready smile. "Before dessert," she said, raising her glass higher, "I just want to thank everyone here. Family means everything, and I'm so grateful we could all be together." I stayed seated on the patio, Leora curled beside me, Kalen quietly pulling at a loose thread on his sweater. We could hear every word. Names were named. Uncle Ray, Mom and Dad, even Jenna, Vera's Pilates partner, who'd only joined family holidays since last spring. The caterer, her florist, not me, not the pie I brought, not the kids Vera used to call her bonus babies when she wanted social media points for being the cool aunt. I didn't expect praise. I didn't need a spotlight. But what I didn't expect was to be edited out of the evening like I hadn't shown up at all. Like I wasn't even standing outside the glass door, watching her raise a toast to a complete guest list that didn't include us. Leora stood up slowly. "Can I give her my card now?" she whispered. I hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, baby, just hand it to her real quick." She slipped through the sliding door, quiet and polite like I'd taught her, the card clutched in her two small hands. She waited until Vera had finished clinking glasses and leaned in, tapping her arm. "I made this for you." Vera didn't even look. "Aw, sweetie," she said, taking the card with 2 fingers and dropping it into a paper bag filled with used napkins and plastic cups. "So thoughtful." Leora turned around. Her steps were slower than before. Her mouth stayed neutral, but her eyes had lost something. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. She just walked back outside, sat beside me, and stared at the floor. That was the moment something inside me shifted from bruised to burning. I stood, brushed the wrinkles from my jeans, and walked back inside. Vera was by the hallway, reapplying lipstick in the mirror. "You okay?" she asked, as if this were small talk at brunch. I met her eyes through the reflection. "You've made your point, Vera, but don't do this to the kids." She turned, smile still fixed. "I didn't do anything, oh. You just keep imagining battles that aren't there." My voice didn't rise. I'd long learned there's more power in control than in chaos. "I'm done pretending this is normal." Before she could respond, our mother stepped into the hallway, her wine still in hand, her face lined with concern, or maybe just curiosity. "What's going on?" she asked, already weary. "She threw away Leora's card," I said simply. Didn't even glance at it. Isolde looked between us. Let's not ruin a nice night over something small. Of course, small, like crumbs, like paper, like children. That's when I saw it clearly. This was never about fairness. It had always been about preserving peace for everyone else, even if it meant sacrificing me over and over again. So long as the table looked beautiful and the pictures could be posted, it didn't matter who sat outside. I didn't argue, didn't cry. I walked back out onto the patio and sat beside Leora. She didn't speak. I placed my hand gently over hers. Kalen reached over and rested his chin on my arm. Inside, I heard laughter again, forks clinking against plates, glasses rising in another toast, to legacy and love. Out here, we had silence and air growing colder by the minute, but I had something else now. I had resolve. This would be the last Thanksgiving we sat outside a table we used to help set, and from that curve came something stronger, forged from silence and every sharp-edged word I didn't throw back. The next wave of food came out like a second act in a play we weren't invited to watch. Roasted ham glistened on a wooden board, wine-glazed carrots spilled onto serving trays. Vera's signature cornbread stuffing took center stage on a silver platter. The scent reached us on the patio long before anyone did. A teenage boy I didn't recognize, probably someone's cousin's kid, brought out 2 paper plates stacked high with leftover mac and cheese and green beans. No sides, no garnish, no care. He dropped them on our table with a quick, "Here you go," before darting back inside. Leora looked at her plate, then over at mine. "Why don't we get the same food, Mommy?" I didn't have an answer that wouldn't sting. I just smoothed my napkin across my lap and said, "It's okay, sweetie. It's warm." But I watched, from the corner of my eye, as Vera prepared seconds for the neighbor's children. Stuffing layered neatly, gravy poured just right. She laughed at something Isolde said, and never once looked toward us. Kaylin let out a burst of laughter when Leora told a silly knock-knock joke, one he'd heard before, but still liked. It wasn't loud, just happy. Callista walked by, holding a wine glass like it was a prop she needed to stay balanced. "Let's keep the energy down, kiddos," she said, voice clipped like scissors. 5 minutes later, Vera's youngest jumped on the couch inside, blasting music from a speaker. Everyone laughed. Leora immediately dropped her voice. Kaylin didn't speak again for the next half hour. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I rose from my seat, smoothed down my shirt, and walked back into the house. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and ego. Vera and Callista were by the fridge, pouring wine. They looked up when I entered, but didn't move. "I need a word," I said calmly. Vera tilted her head. "Sure." I stepped in close enough to lower my voice without losing strength. "Stop treating my children like strangers. Or worse, liabilities." Callista took a sudden interest in her wine. Vera didn't flinch. "We're doing the best we can, oh. It's not always about you." "No," I said, "but it is about how you make room, or don't, for people who don't look like your Instagram." She sighed, almost performative. "I think you're reading too much into everything." "Funny," I said. "I used to think I wasn't reading enough." I walked away before she could respond. There was no point. Back outside, Leora hadn't touched her plate. She sat still, watching the backyard like it might grow a different version of this day. "If we're not wanted here," she said softly, "why do we come?" I sat beside her, pulled her close. "Because sometimes," I said, "you show up one last time, to be sure you're not crazy." She nodded once. That was the last question she asked all day. As dusk settled in, the inside world got brighter. The lights came on, the music turned up, and dessert was served. I watched plates of pie pass around the table through the glass. Laughter, whipped cream, seconds. No one called for us. No one asked if we wanted any. I checked my phone. No texts, no missed calls, no messages from anyone asking, "Where are you?" or "Are you okay?" I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I started making a list in my head. Not a list of grievances. Those had been memorized long ago. A list of actions, names, receipts, boundaries. They didn't break me, but I bent enough to never return to shape again. If they could crop us out of their memory, I could crop them out of my future. We were still outside, watching the party unfold through a frame that excluded us. The chandelier above the dining table shimmered like a centerpiece in a staged life. Inside, everything looked polished, seating cards placed just so, wine bottles aligned like trophies, the laughter calibrated to seem effortless. And yet, standing there behind the glass, I felt like I was watching a movie I had once starred in, now recast without notice. My eyes landed on a photo mounted above the fireplace, framed in gold leaf. It was last year's Thanksgiving. Everyone in the picture beamed under string lights in that very room. The turkey was perfect, the children well-behaved, the women glowing. And just like that, I knew what was missing. Us. The cropping was clean. Our chairs had been at the end of the table then, barely in the frame, but still there. In this version, someone had trimmed it, reshaped the past so neatly that you wouldn't even know we'd existed that night. Back outside, Kaylin was pushing his macaroni around with the back of his fork. No appetite, no spark. I sat beside him, unsure of what comfort I still had left to offer. He didn't look at me when he said it. "Mom, did we do something wrong?" I couldn't say no fast enough, but I also couldn't lie. "No, baby," I said slowly. "We just weren't part of their picture." He nodded like he understood, but he shouldn't have. Not yet. I excused myself and went back into the house, not to fight, not to plead, just to breathe. Upstairs, the hallway smelled like lemon polish and perfume. I entered the bathroom and shut the door behind me, the noise from downstairs dulled by tile and drywall. I looked in the mirror. Not just at my face, but into it. I didn't look broken, but I didn't look familiar either. I'd spent years crafting a version of myself for these people, Always cheerful, always helping, always agreeable. Even when it cost me sleep, money, or pride. But in that mirror, I saw someone else. Someone who had finally stopped asking to be liked and started wondering what it might feel like to just be left alone. The silence inside that bathroom was heavier than any of the conversations I'd tried to have all day, and I let it settle into my chest without pushing it away. When I returned to the patio, Leora was sketching in her notebook. Her hands were steady, but her lines were jagged. Kaylin sat cross-legged, still quiet. I sat down and opened my phone. No texts, no messages from Vera, not even a glance from Isolde. It was like we were deleted in real time. I opened my photo album and scrolled back until I found it. The uncropped version of the family photo. There we were. Me with my arms around the kids, Leora mid-laugh, Kaylin holding a pie server like a sword. The pie, my pie, was front and center on the table. That version didn't live on the wall inside anymore. I pressed my thumb to the screen, stared at that moment like it owed me something. It didn't. But it reminded me I hadn't imagined it. We had been there. We had mattered. Once, I looked back through the window at the people raising glasses over store-bought pies and practiced smiles. And something in me settled. I didn't need them to bring my name up again. I didn't need an apology or even a confrontation. I just needed a decision. I looked at my children, mine, not theirs, and I realized this would be the last time I ever showed up to a place I wasn't welcomed like family. I didn't stand and announce it, didn't throw a scene. I simply folded that thought into myself, quiet and final, like a suitcase packed without slamming a single drawer. She didn't know I wasn't planning to stir the pot. I was preparing to flip the whole table. The house had grown louder since the toast, but not in volume, just in confidence. Once dessert had been served and Vera's curated chaos settled, the guests became looser, more relaxed. The energy shifted from presentation to preservation. Keep it light, keep it smiling, keep the ugly parts outside, where they belong. I stepped inside for water. Not to speak, not to argue, just to refill a glass. No one stopped me, no one noticed. I passed through the dining room like I was made of fog. They laughed over half-empty plates, talked about remodeling projects, holiday travel, who had gained weight or lost it. The kind of talk people wrap their lives in, so they don't have to admit what's really fraying underneath. I paused in the hallway near the kitchen entrance. The scent of spiced apples and tension drifted toward me. Callista's voice floated through, soft but not low enough. "She's hurting, Vera. You know that." Then came the answer, lighter but heavier somehow. "She always thinks she's different, special, just likes drama. Everything's always about her." The words didn't land hard. They slid in like smoke under a door, curling around my ribs and settling in places I'd once considered protected. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I stepped fully into the kitchen, the weight of silence suddenly mine to wield. Vera's hand froze mid-pour. Callista's lips parted like she might explain it all away, but no sound came. I walked to the sink, filled my glass, and stood by the counter just long enough for discomfort to bloom. Then I said, "Don't worry, I'll make sure we're gone before dessert ends. Wouldn't want to add any more flavor to the evening." I took a sip, cool, sharp, like me. Neither of them answered. I turned and walked back toward the patio, but just before I stepped through the door, I felt Callista behind me. She didn't touch me, just spoke quietly. "She's the one on the house title now, just so you know. Stirring things up? It won't go well." I didn't turn around. "And yet, I'm the one who's paid their utility bills more than once." Callista exhaled. "Ophelia." "Thanks for the heads up," I said, "but I've been in the dark long enough." I stepped back into the night like a woman who knew where every switch was and how to flick them off one by one. The kids were sitting near the edge of the patio, folding napkins into odd little shapes. Leora held hers like a swan. Kaylin tried to make a shark, but gave up halfway. They looked up when I sat down. "Everything okay?" Leora asked. "Yes," I said, "but it's about to get better." I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. Fingers tapping, no fury, just facts, names, bank accounts, legal resources, the kind of people who don't care if you're the youngest daughter or the one who always brought the pie. They care about paper, proof, paper trails, receipts. Vera wanted a legacy. I could give her that. But it wouldn't be the kind she could frame. She owned the house. But I owned the silence, and I just gave it a deadline. I stepped back inside, not to ask for space, not to make a scene, just to grab my purse. That's what I told myself. I needed my lip balm, maybe my charger, something small. But truthfully, I was going in to look at the picture again. The hallway was still. The hum of conversation from the dining room was distant, like it came from another building. I walked past the foyer table, past the polished floor that always smelled faintly of lemon oil, and stopped in front of the frame. The photo Vera had enlarged and hung by the staircase. There it was, Thanksgiving from last year. All smiles, all perfection. Except the corners had changed. The edges that once held the three of us, me, Leora, Kaylin, had been edited clean. We were airbrushed out of our own family. I didn't blink. I pulled out my phone, took a picture of the picture, and for the first time that day, I smiled. In the kitchen, I stood with my back to the fridge and opened my email. I typed in 2 search terms, piano and delivery. The thread popped up immediately. An invoice dated 2 years ago. Model, serial number, billing address. The payment pulled from my account, signed by me. That piano, the one Vera used to anchor her living room, the one everyone admired as her heirloom, was mine. I hit forward. 2. ArdenAdavislawGroup.com. Subject, time-stamped and still standing. Attachment, pianoinvoice.pdf. I pressed send. That quiet click was louder than any glass I could have thrown. As I made my way to the coat rack, I felt a light touch on my elbow. Mavis. She had worked for our family since I was 10, retired last fall after her arthritis got worse. But she was here tonight, probably invited as a nostalgic gesture. Vera loved making herself look benevolent. She looked smaller than I remembered, but her eyes were just as sharp. I shouldn't say anything, she whispered. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. But I think you should know. She moved the assets back in February, transferred most of it into her name. Quietly. Your mother didn't push back. My throat tightened. Mavis reached into her coat pocket and unfolded a piece of paper. Worn, creased, handled too many times. It's a photocopy, she said. I found it in the drawer while I was cleaning. A new power of attorney. Your dad's signature looked off. I kept it, just in case. I took the paper from her hands. My fingers trembled, but not with fear. With clarity. Thank you, I said, for not tossing it. She gave a small nod and disappeared back into the crowd. I walked back to the patio like a woman returning to her children, not a guest exiting quietly. Leora looked up first. Can we go now? She asked, her voice low but certain. Soon, I said. I just needed to be sure. I sat between them, my arms resting behind their chairs. The air outside had cooled. The laughter inside had grown louder, looser. Someone had opened another bottle of wine. I let it all wash past me. When we stood to leave, I didn't slip through the back door. I walked straight through the dining room. Heads turned, conversations paused. Not fully, but enough. Vera was mid-laugh, a wine glass in one hand, her fork in the other. I stopped just behind her chair. The piano's still beautiful, I said casually. She stilled. I leaned in slightly, not for drama, just precision. I'll send you a copy of the original purchase receipt, for tax records, of course. She didn't turn around. She didn't have to. The silence did it for her. She kept the photo, I kept the proof. And now, I had the permission I never knew I needed. The next morning came with no apology, no knock on the door, no voicemail. Just sunlight bleeding through the blinds and the lingering ache of a conversation I never really wanted to have, but had to. I lay there in my bed, staring at the ceiling. The image of Vera's frozen smile seared into my mind. Her laugh cutting off mid-breath the moment I mentioned the piano. The silence in that room after I walked away had said more than any family toast ever could. I reached for my phone. There it was, a group text, sent at 7:03 a.m. Thankful for another beautiful Thanksgiving. Grateful for everyone who came and made it so special. Love you all. Photos followed. Vera's signature angles. The table. The guests. The smiles. We weren't in a single frame. I walked into the kitchen and found Leora already awake, seated at the small table with her colored pencils scattered around. She wasn't drawing turkeys or pumpkins. She was sketching people, faceless outlines with shoulders curved inward. One figure had a ponytail that looked suspiciously like mine. I didn't ask her what it meant. I didn't need to. "We're okay," I said as I sat next to her. She nodded, but didn't stop drawing. I watched her for a moment, then turned my attention to the stack of unopened mail on the counter. Most of it was junk, a few bills, but one envelope stood out. Smaller, handwritten, the paper aged. The return address was from a bank that had closed our father's account after his bypass. I opened it slowly, unsure what I was expecting. Inside, a letter, dated 2 years ago. "Oh, Feli," it began. "If you're reading this, then either I've grown a spine, or you've stopped waiting for me to have one. I want you to know something. You've always been the one who saw the cracks in this family. You patched them. Quietly, often without credit. I didn't help fix them, but I saw you try. That matters." I read it twice, then a third time. It wasn't redemption. It didn't erase the nights he'd sat silent while I was dismissed. But it was something. A small dented acknowledgement that I had not imagined my place, or my pain. I folded the letter and slid it into the kitchen drawer, beneath the tray of batteries and spare keys. It didn't need a frame. Some truths don't. Later that afternoon, after the kids had eaten and Leora had taped her faceless sketches to the refrigerator door, I drove across town. No music, no calls. Sable's studio sat on the edge of downtown, wedged between a yoga shop and a boutique candle store. I parked, walked in, and found her behind the counter, rearranging a display of winter-themed ceramics. She looked up. The recognition in her eyes was instant and not entirely welcome. "I'm not here to fight," I said, "or rehash anything." She nodded once, guarded. "I just wanted to say something out loud. I wasn't the problem. You were just more comfortable with Vera's version of me than with the truth." Sable didn't respond. I waited a beat, then left. That silence, too, was an answer. Back home, the sky had shifted toward dusk. Kalen was on the floor with his Lego set, building something without instructions. Leora was watching a cartoon that only half held her attention. I opened the kitchen drawer, glanced at the letter again, then closed it softly. Not everything needs to be declared. Some things are real just because you keep going. They had their photos, their curated feed, their empty smiles. But I had proof. For once, they were the ones bracing for fallout, and I was already steady on the ground. 2 weeks had passed since the pie, the photo, and the receipts. The silence that followed was not unexpected, but it was strategic. I hadn't burned the house down. I hadn't thrown chairs or exposed the family secrets in public. I had simply and legally turned on the lights. At 10:17 a.m., there was a knock at my door. Firm, measured. I opened it to a man in a courier vest holding a slim envelope that looked harmless enough. It wasn't. Inside was confirmation. The asset freeze had been approved. I didn't smile. I didn't even breathe deeper. I read the document twice, then slid it into a folder labeled Restoration and tucked it into the drawer with the letter from my father. My phone buzzed. First Callista, then Jenna. Then someone I hadn't heard from since Easter. All group texts, each message some variation of, What's happening with the house? Has anyone talked to Vera? Is this a mistake? I said nothing. Then Callista sent a screenshot. Vera, hunched at brunch, mascara smudged, dabbing her eyes with a cocktail napkin. The caption, "She's trying to ruin me." I stared at it, typed out one line. No, I'm making the accounting match, the history. Then I turned my phone over and left it face down. An hour later, my buzzer rang again. This time, it wasn't a courier. Alaric. I hadn't seen him since Thanksgiving. Not at the table, not on the patio, not in any of the rooms that mattered. I opened the door, and there he was, holding his hat in his hands like a schoolboy summoned to the principal's office. "I won't stay long," he said. I stepped aside. He sat at the kitchen counter, the same place where Kaylin did his spelling and Leora painted tiny pumpkins. He didn't speak for a full minute. Finally, he said, "She told me you blindsided the family." I filled a glass with water, handed it to him, then leaned against the fridge. "I sat outside your window for 4 hours," I said. "How blind were you then?" His shoulders dropped. She wanted too much, and I let her have it. I nodded once, not as forgiveness, but as acknowledgement. "Why now?" he asked. "Why pull the trigger?" I tilted my head toward the hallway. "Let me show you something." We walked together, slowly, to the frame-covered wall outside the kids' room. Photos from the last few years. Leora in her astronaut costume, Kaylin holding a frog. Me, smiling, not for anyone's approval, but because I'd learned to. He stared. "You made this a home," he said, barely audible. "They gave me the space," I replied. "I built the foundation." He nodded slowly, said nothing else. At the door, he hesitated. "She won't bounce back from this." I looked him in the eye. "Then maybe she'll learn to land softer." He left. No hug, no promises. Just silence. And, finally, consequence. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at my laptop and opened a draft email to Arden. Subject: Final confirmation, body, proceed. I'm not afraid of being labeled anymore. I hit send. Some wounds don't scar. They just stop asking to be seen. 3 evenings had passed since I sent Arden that final email. Dinner was on the stove, chicken and rice, simple. Kaylin was lining up dominoes along the living room rug, while Leora hummed a song she'd made up and taped more drawings to the fridge. I was grating cheese when the doorbell rang. Leora peeked through the peephole, then looked back at me without saying a word. She opened the door and stepped aside. Isolde stood there, coat zipped up to her throat, her hands empty, her face unreadable. She didn't ask to come in. I stepped aside anyway. She didn't remove her coat, just walked slowly into the apartment, her eyes scanning the space like she was visiting a museum she didn't know was curated by me. Her gaze lingered on the hallway, on the framed photos I'd chosen, Leora mid-spin in her ballet costume, Kaylin covered in mud with a victorious smile, me on the floor laughing with both of them tangled around me. Her voice came small, careful. "Your place, it feels more like family than anything we ever had." I didn't respond. Not right away. I didn't need to. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured her tea without asking what she wanted. She didn't refuse it, just held the mug like it might warm something she'd forgotten she had. "I didn't know how to be fair without making things worse," she said, her voice raspier than I remembered. I didn't give her a cushion. I just replied, "And doing nothing made it worst of all." She blinked, looked down at her tea, then back at the photos on the hallway wall. We sat in the kind of silence that doesn't ache, but weighs. After a few minutes, she reached into her purse. I could tell she didn't want to. She was stalling. Her hand came out holding a piece of paper, folded 4 times. "I wasn't sure if you'd want this," she said. "Callista told me. It ended up in the trash." She laid it on the table. I unfolded it. Leora's drawing, creased and slightly torn at the corner. but still bold. Vibrant marker colors and shaky block letters. "Thank you, Aunt Vera." The little stick figures held hands, their heads too big for their bodies, hearts floating above them like balloons. I didn't say thank you. I didn't say anything. I just nodded once and slid it to the edge of the table, where I could see it clearly. Isolde sipped her tea, watching the steam rise. When she stood, I did too. She walked slowly to the door, paused, turned. "Do you hate me?" she asked. I studied her face, the one I used to try so hard to impress, to win. "I stopped needing to answer that," I said. She nodded, didn't ask again. No hug, no, "Let's talk more." Just a door that didn't slam, but clicked shut like punctuation. I walked to the fridge and gently removed a magnet, pinned the drawing up next to Leora's new one from this morning. 3 figures, 1 dog, a tree with orange leaves. Underneath, me, Kaylin, Mommy, home. This time, I used 2 magnets, just in case. Some wounds don't scar. They just stop asking to be seen. New Year's Eve arrived with no fanfare. Our apartment, dim and warm, was laced with the soft hum of string lights and the smell of cocoa that lingered longer than it should. The kids had hung handmade stars from yarn across the living room windows. Leora's said "New Beginnings" in glitter glue. Kaylin's just had a smiley face and 2024 written 3 times in red marker. There was no knock, no card, no "let's talk." The porch stayed silent. At 8:32 p.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from the family group chat. I opened it, not out of curiosity, but to confirm what I already knew. Vera had posted her year-end recap, a carousel of perfect photos, brunches, vacations, wine glasses raised in golden light. Thanksgiving made the cut. Everyone crowded around her dining room table, laughing like the world outside didn't exist. Her caption read, "Grateful for my beautiful family. Thank you for being my constant." Tags to everyone. Everyone but me. Everyone but my kids. I stared at it for 3 beats. Then I locked my phone, set it face down, and didn't touch it again for the rest of the night. It didn't sting anymore. That absence used to carve through me like ice. Now it was just a blank space I no longer felt obligated to fill. Kaylin wandered over and draped a blanket around my shoulders. "Movie night, right?" he asked, like we hadn't missed a single tradition. "Right," I said, smiling. We chose a cartoon about a dragon who didn't want to be scary anymore. The kids took turns choosing popcorn toppings. I let them put marshmallows in their cocoa, even though it was late. The whole night glowed soft and quiet, the way peace often does. After the movie, Leora pulled a drawing from her backpack and taped it to the fridge. It was crooked and perfect, 3 of us in silly party hats, under a fireworks sky. Above it, she wrote, "Our year." She spelled year as year, but I didn't correct her. I didn't ask her to redraw it or straighten the tape. I just added 2 bright magnets and kissed the top of her head as I walked by. I found myself standing near the sliding glass door, the same kind that once separated us from everyone else. I could almost see the old patio, the dog bowl, the wobbly chair. I remembered the turkey I never tasted, the toast I wasn't part of. But I didn't need to make sense of any of it anymore. Because what we had now, the warmth, the laughter, the badly spelled drawings, wasn't stolen from anyone. It had been built, from scratch, from pain, from choosing ourselves. As midnight neared, we sat on the couch under one big blanket. No one called, no one knocked. And for once I didn't wonder why. I glanced at the porch light switch. My hand hovered for a moment. Then I whispered, more to myself than anyone else, "Not tonight." I left it off. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but because this year, we didn't need anyone to find their way to us. We didn't leave the light on, and still, we were home. You know, sometimes the hardest battles we fight are the ones where no one throws a punch, just silence, exclusion, and polite dismissal. And yet, those are the ones that shape us the most. If there's anything this story taught me, it's that waiting for someone to see your worth is a slow kind of heartbreak. But choosing to see it yourself? That's freedom. I used to think belonging meant being invited in, being acknowledged, being thanked. But now I know, belonging starts when you stop begging for a seat and start building your own table. One where your name isn't left off the list. One where your kids never have to ask, "Did we do something wrong?" To anyone listening who's ever felt invisible, uninvited, unimportant, I see you, I've been you, and I promise, the life you rebuild for yourself will be more sacred than the one they tried to erase. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been made to feel like a guest in your own family? What did you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this video touched something in you, drop a 1 below or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't, tell me why. It's okay. This space is for real conversations. If you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to this channel. We've got more stories like this, real, raw, and full of heart. Because sometimes, the truth we need most is the one someone else dared to tell first.